This is the Soft Power Podcast, episode 14. Hi and welcome. I'm Susan Callender, and I'm so glad you're here. I just mentioned during the intro to this podcast that this is episode 14. Now, I must share with you that this could potentially be episode 114 or so, had I actually followed through with my intention to launch the Soft Power Podcast 2 years ago. But I didn't. I certainly thought about it. I performed my due diligence in learning all that I could about podcast production, and despite my best intentions, I could not bring myself to push record. What's more, it bothered me a lot, mostly because I knew the only thing standing in my way was me. Maybe it was the shyness I experienced in the past coming back to haunt me. Perhaps it was just another aspect of my introversion, giving me yet another reason to play small. Whatever it was that was holding me back, it wasn't until I got on the right side of my intentions did the podcast actually come to fruition. And I want you to know how deeply grateful I am that you've downloaded and subscribed to the Soft Power Podcast. You can say that your actions had intent. My guest today is Paul Good, and he knows all about what drives us through the power of intention. Throughout our individual days, we create mini, bite-sized, or jumbo desires to do and accomplish things. And sometimes, despite the level of importance, some of those things just never happen. What if your intention is to present to a potential customer or to your colleagues, or to start creating videos and sharing your expertise? Maybe it's simply to make a case to your boss as to why you deserve a promotion, but you haven't done anything yet with your intention to be more assertive and advocate for yourself. Well, Paul can help you go from where you are now to where you want to be. He's created a very popular community, and the program is called the Intentional Living Membership. Welcome to the Soft Power Podcast, Paul.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you, Susan.
You're welcome. It's been my intention to have you on the podcast for a while now. Just kidding, Paul. I am only at episode 14. But what I wanted to do was to use as an example how we toss around the word intention so often and frequently in a meaningless way. Why do you think we do that?
Well, I think all of us get moments of inspiration that we want to be able to accomplish something. We connect to something that we know will be valuable for us. And in that moment, we really feel like, I'm going to do this. But, a few moments later, or maybe an hour later, we get connected with something else and we move on to other things.
I imagine this being a really lucrative industry because I do that all day.
Well, I think all of us do. Our natural tendency is to be able to be attracted to each new thing that comes along. And the piece that really makes a difference is what type of thing will carry you forward continuously. What will attract you to being able to come back to something that is so important that you'll keep doing it. It comes down to why.
So why do I have a desire to do something, and why something else may get in the way of that desire that's keeping me from being intentional with my initial desire?
Yeah, it's really about the fact that we see these different things that come along, but we're not really guiding our own ship. We're not really being intentional about the reason that we want to be able to bring certain things into our lives. For example, when you were talking about your podcast, you were excited about it. You thought it would be a really good thing. And you felt, in your heart, you really felt this is going to be a great way to be able to reach out to people.
I did.
But in the scope of the priorities that you set in terms of what was most important to you, up until the time you made the decision to actually go for it, you hadn't prioritized that as being something that was at the forefront of what you wanted.
I thought that I had, but apparently I had not.
So the thing to look at is, so why now?
Mm-hmm.
What was different about the way you were thinking that allowed you to be able to connect to why it mattered to do it now? Something pushed you over the edge.
There was something that pushed me. You're correct, Paul. Well, there was an event that happened, and that was not a competitor, but someone else that I know very well who perhaps a month before, a person that I speak to frequently happened to mention, oh, I'm thinking about starting a podcast. And a few weeks later, she had a podcast. So that prompted me to look at myself and say, okay, you have a problem. You've had this intention that you have not followed through with. And days later, my podcast was published. So sometimes that's what drives you.
Yeah. But, the thing is, what you did is you actually drew upon your a natural competitiveness. And that's one of the elements that inside, the ILM that we look at in terms of what are your natural gifts? What are the things that you were uniquely born with that you can leverage to be able to intentionally create the experience of life that you want? And the more you get clear about that, the more you can start to say, oh, well, if I want to do this, does it fit in to the experience of life that I'm actually trying to build? If it does, then I can start looking at my toolbox and figure out what I can use to get there. And if it doesn't, it allows you to make a decision to say, I don't think that's really going to get me where I want to go. Never mind.
Does everyone have a different toolbox or a set of prompters that gets them from where they are to where they want to be with their intentions?
Yes. See, that's the really cool thing is that, when people actually walk through the process, everybody's building what I call their own owner's manual. And the reason that it's so cool is the fact that I believe that each of us came into this life being given a unique set of tools that were specifically designed to help us succeed in the areas that will take our spirit to the next level. Mm-hmm. Basically, I see this as we sort of, it sounds kind of cosmic, but, I really see the life that we live as the training ground for the spirit. How do we reach a higher level of being in a really good way? And the way you have to do that is you have to go through experiences that help you mold that and sculpt that spirit in a more and more refined and defined way.
I understand what you're saying, and that you call it cosmic and I call it a little bit of woo, but Is that same thing that takes you to that higher level. Because if you are not being the person that you are intended to be or want to be, you are not living your best life at your highest self.
Yeah. And I tell you, if you want to be able to take a phrase out of all the woo-woo stuff and say, it's basically the fear of missing out. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you, the underlying thing that drives me is the fear of missing out on me, the experience of the gifts that I have. I mean, think about it. What a drag it would be if you went through this life knowing you have these different talents and skills, or even knowing that you even know just a few of them, right? Mm-hmm. And that you didn't get the chance to see really how good you could get at some of these things, to really, how much exhilaration you could get from these natural gifts and have fun with them. Think of the good things that you can do if you understand what those gifts are, and then you start intentionally applying them to the things in the world that you really want to make better. It just gives you a whole different perspective on bringing in things that aren't important to you, that seem like, a momentary, wow, then maybe that will turn me around, or this will turn me around.
Yes.
and you can discard a lot of those things when you're clear about the gifts you've been given, which are the clues to be able to point you in the direction of the things you should be doing, things that will connect you to fulfillment, and the experience of life that you have created a vision for. Now, that doesn't mean, it doesn't mean you're going out and say you put on a Tesla, or you want to, things like that. Not the physical things so much. They can be an outshoot of it. But what I really mean is that these are the experiences that when you wake up in the morning, you want to be able to connect yourself with things that are happy, interesting, curious, engaging. What are those things that really just sort of light you up inside that are part of the experience of living?
Do you think that most people wake up happy and engaged and looking forward to connecting with others and living at a high vibration, if you will?
Well, I think we all suspect that each of us, if we look at ourselves, don't always wake up that way. And my guess is that, and my experience has been that most people in the population don't necessarily wake up that way every day.
I think it's possible. It's my intention, even though I may miss some things with my intentionality, it is my intention to be happy every day, no matter what. And therefore, I can correct myself if I have a moment where I'm not feeling happy, because I believe that it's a choice.
It's absolutely right. And what you said is that the word correct, life is we talk about sculpting a life, because that's what it really is. It's about, working these little pieces so that it gets more and more towards the image of the, the life that you want to have. And it's all about making those corrections. It's like lots of little corrections that go on during the day because you are intentional about the experience of life that you want. Because a happy life happens intentionally. I spread the word for that because it's so easy for us to think that happiness just happens by things happening to us. Somebody does something nice for us. There's, something that goes on that just makes us happy. And that's where we get our happiness from. But it's just not true.
I agree with you. I think a lot of people live a very reactionary life, not realizing that you are the creator of everything that happens to you. And everything that you want is already here. But if you are not connected to it, then it won't appear in your life.
Well, a great analogy, which is super simple, is, you go out and you buy a car and you buy a red car and you get out on the highway and suddenly you realize after a few minutes, wow, there are a lot of red cars on the highway. I never really had any idea how many red cars there were. Well, all you're doing is experiencing one of the natural tools that you have built into you. Your mind is taking in millions of pieces of information every moment through all of your senses.
The reticular activating system.
Yeah. And so all this information is coming in. Now, if your mind didn't have some way of being able to filter what was important and what was not important, you would explode. Yeah. So, you just can't, what do you do with all this information, right? So you're built with a prioritizing system, and that basically tunes out the things that are not relevant to the underlying experience that you're focused on at the moment. So when you're driving down the road before you bought the car, you just saw all the cars and really didn't pay attention to it. But now it says, hey, I'm an owner of a red car. I wonder if there are any other red cars out there. I'm going to show you all the red cars that I can find. Because your subconscious works like that. Now, that could be good stuff, which you can intentionally put in, or it can be not so good stuff, and it'll give you that too. So when you prioritize things in your life towards a specific type of intention, you want to be happy every day, well, your mind is going to start to support being able to make you aware of times when you're veering off and you need a correction.
Is there a correlation between one's self-worth and the extent to which they're living an intentional life?
Self-worth is a perception. We create a perception of what our self-worth is. And when you live intentionally, the whole mission is to be able to live a life that really connects to all the valuable things that are already in you and use them to the max. When you're doing that, you change the perception of your self-worth. Because the more times you use a natural strength, the better you get at it. The better you get at something, the more you dig yourself.
True.
Not in a self-lauding way. It's that inner power of, I'm capable of doing that. I've gone through this kind of thing, and I came out the other side because I have this quality. And all those are elements that keep reinforcing your own value.
You know, what you're speaking to, Paul, goes back to why I opened the podcast asking the question where it was just a little joke, telling you that it was my intention to have you on, because intention is so much more deep than just the use of the word, the way that we toss the word around. There's so much more to it. Was there a particular event or a series of events that prompted you to seek out intentionality for yourself and share it with a much larger worldwide community?
I have to say, yeah. It really came down to trying to be able to sort out what are all these different things that are going on in my life. You know, when I was growing up, there were a bunch of things that most people would probably say are, weren't ideal. But I recognized that the only person who really had control of how my life was going to go was me. And I was very fortunate to recognize that very early on. But I didn't know how I was going to figure out what I should be doing with my life. And it seemed incredibly frustrating that I would, go through these different things, but I just didn't feel like what I was doing was really lighting me up inside. I think all of us have that sort of, quiet yearning to feel like, wouldn't it be cool if I could just live a life that was really energizing and that I got to do cool things and got to be involved with really interesting people and be able to help in ways that I, hadn't even thought of. And that sort of little voice is always there. And it gets louder and louder the more you veer away from using the natural gifts that you have and being clear about what you want to bring to the world.
Well, speaking of natural gifts, listeners of the South Power podcast have expressed on numerous occasions, I should say, a fear of speaking up or a hesitancy to speak up in meetings, or right now, because we're still in the midst of a pandemic, even speaking up on Zoom calls. How can intentional living or your program help them?
Well, several ways. One is the fact that if you get really clear about your own value, it boosts your confidence. And so the more that you recognize how valuable you are and what you bring to the table, sometimes literally at a board meeting or a committee meeting or whatever it happens to be, or a Zoom meeting, and why it matters. Why is it that the thing you want to be able to talk about is important? When you know why it matters, it allows you to be able to have that power, that push, that allows you to be able to raise your hand and say, I have something I want to be able to say that's connected with what you just said. Or I had an experience that really relates to what you just said, and I think it'll be helpful here.
I love that answer, because people don't realize that they're not thinking about the listener or the person who will receive or who's on the receiving end of the value that they have to provide. They're only in their own head. And when you're in your head and not speaking to what people want from you or what they expect from you, that is where that hesitancy comes from. But when you feel confident about what it is that you have to offer, then it's much easier. it's easier for you to be intentional about speaking up because you know that it should come from you and not from one of your coworkers or colleagues or from someone else who just likes to speak up all of the time.
And one of the things that I try to recommend to people that they keep in mind, and I try to do this in every meeting, every combination I have with people, is constantly keep running through my mind, but how can I help here? Because when you're coming from that place, constantly looking at listening, you're listening more intently because you're looking for ways that you can be able to help. And by constantly reminding, but how can I help here? You're going to speak when you think you can actually create value, and you're going to listen more because you're trying to find the places where people need help that relate to your own expertise.
Is there a specific path or a framework that you take people through, or is it an individual path?
Well, no, there's actually a structure. There's got to be some purpose to this. I mean, if you look at nature, every single thing in nature has a purpose. Things happen in this world. The process that I've designed is designed after I figured out, and I was like, well, gee, how about if I just get really, connected with those natural strengths, and I start looking for ways in the world where I could add the most value using these, because these are the places that I was fine-tuned to be able to help.
So who is the typical person who seeks you out?
People basically who have gotten to the point, as I did, where they were just incredibly frustrated at feeling like their life has some purpose, but they just can't nail it down. Mm-hmm. And the ILM literally walks you through a step-by-step process that helps you uncover your natural abilities and gifts, get really clear about the experience of life you want, and then coaches you to be able to start bringing in the elements of the experience of life you want using the gifts that you have, which are the guide to what types of things you really should be engaging yourself in.
That is a very important factor. I thank you so much.
Thanks, Susan.
You can find Paul Good at thepowerofintentionalliving.com, and I'll link to that and all of his social channels in the show notes. What's your greatest interpersonal or people skills challenge? Do you hesitate when it's your turn to speak up in meetings, or do you let the outspoken and sometimes loud extroverts overshadow you? If that's the case, I'm inviting you to join the Introvert to Influencer Facebook group. It's specifically for people like you who are tired of playing small and you're finally ready to step in from the sidelines and into the game. Just type Introvert to Influencer in the top search bar on Facebook. We'd love to have you. Thanks so much for joining me today. Bye for now.